Welcome to the Mom Spectrum, where each week moms share their stories about motherhood, careers, and finding fulfillment. This show is to help moms feel more confident, because there are a million right ways to be a mom. I'm your host, Stephanie Schindler. Today we have Nichole Whitaker with us, and she is going to share some of her story. So we met a couple years ago now. We were both working together at Bruzy, and at the time I was working remotely and I was pregnant, and I just remember having this short conversation with her, and it's kind of stuck with me. It was kind of a poignant time in my life where I was figuring out what I was going to be doing when my daughter came, and was trying to make those decisions for myself around work. And I so appreciated her empathy at the time. And so she was one of the first people that came to mind. So thank you so much, Nichole.
Yeah, well, as Stephanie mentioned, we work together at Bruzy, which is where I'm still at. Bruzy is a SaaS company based out of Los Angeles. And I head their learning and development, which basically means I'm in charge of client and employee learning, which is actually a lot of fun. It's very busy, but very rewarding, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And in addition to that, I have a very lovely husband who I've been married to for almost 13 years. We met in college and married fairly soon after that. And we had a lot of time together as just a couple who was working and living life and traveling. And then we had our son, and he is now 5. And his name is Lou, and he's very sweet and lovely as well. And we're now living in Austin, Texas. Had the opportunity to live in a lot of different places. Lou has already lived in 4 cities in his 5 years on Earth. So we constantly kind of disrupt the normalcy of our life, mostly by design, actually. That's it of my life.
Awesome. Yeah, I can relate to the lots of moving, and it's definitely an added challenge with being a mom and even with working, of course. So let's kind of go back to the beginning a little bit. When you first became a mom, how did you decide what was going to work for you and your family?
Good question. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for the podcast, and I don't know if I have a great answer. I think that one of the things about becoming an adult is, in my childhood, I don't remember, like wanting to be a mom. I think I always assumed that I would become a mom. Like, a lot of my adulthood has been like, oh yeah, well, I guess I thought I was going to do this. I thought I was going to have a career. I thought I was going to be a mom. I thought I was going to get married. But I never really spent a lot of time as a kid really thinking about what my goals were around that and what I thought my life would be like. If I would go back to my 16-year-old self, I probably would have thought that I would have, gotten married at 24, which I actually did, and had a kid at 26 and another kid at 28, and be settled down and maybe still be in Washington somewhere, which is where I grew up. But instead, when we decided to start our family, we were really kind of sitting at one of our favorite Vietnamese restaurants, and, we're just like, gosh, I kind of feel like someone's missing. And then, it's kind of like there's this episode in Sex and the City where they talk about men are like cabs, the light goes on and then suddenly they're like ready to get married. And I kind of think that about couples, like childless couples. I think just like one day your light goes on and then you're ready. If you're fortunate to go about parenting, making that decision, right? So we were fortunate that we had planned it and we felt ready for it and we had that time together. So then, when we knew that we wanted to have him, but I don't think, again, I spent a lot of time thinking about how it was going to look. And so as I was pregnant, we were kind of talking with other families, and you hear everybody, when you're pregnant, you hear everybody's opinion on what you should do. Everybody wants advice. And all of it is good, but also all of it is garbage, because to make their own choices. Everybody's kid is different. Like, everyone's like, oh, use this product. And like, well, that product gave my kid a rash. So, or this bed is the best. Well, I don't know. I read safety reports that said it's kind of a death trap. So, I mean, it's across the board what people are going to tell you to do. And for us, so we had several people be like, oh, are you still going to work? Do you need to work? Like people get really nosy about your business. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And, so we were just like, let's see how it goes. And especially because we're a situation where Brett's company, my husband's company at the time, was going to pay for him to have some maternity leave. My company was covering some of my maternity leave and was like, well, we might as well just like try it. And then, going back to work was incredibly tough. I don't think anyone can prepare you for how difficult that is, because your life is just, as you know, it is over, and you're still trying to figure out this new life, and then you have to combine this other element, and it's like to go back to work and pretend to be an adult again. I always say when you become a parent, you lose your adulthood, and that's true. So you like go into this like very adult world, and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm putting clothes on again that aren't like sweatpants, but then also like pumping at work and doing all of these things, since you're constantly like reminded of this new persona that you have, because everything you know about yourself in a lot of ways changes, and you get some of those things back over time as you become more comfortable with it. But I think you lose a lot of it initially as you're trying to figure out how to collide your old self with this new self. And so I went back to work, and it was tough, and you're trying to figure out all of those things, but we were just like, okay, yeah, I think I'll go back to work. I think I'm going to do it. And then pretty soon, my son was born in Seattle, Washington. And then pretty soon after that, we actually relocated to Portland, in which case I was working from home full time. And that really helped to bring balance, because, Lou was dropped off at school at maybe 7 every day, but then he was, picked up at like 3. And that's really allowed me to probably do this to the degree that I'm satisfied with it. If I didn't have that balance of being able to have the flexibility to go to some of those events, to, make sure that he's not spending 12 hours, at school or daycare every day, I might have made a different choice. But a lot of the circumstances that have happened that I've either kind of walked into or tried to plan around have supported my ability to be a working mom. That was a really long answer.
No, that's so perfect and so interesting. So I live in Canada now, as we've talked about, and it's interesting. So here, it's pretty much you have a year of maternity leave, and so yeah. So when I was in the States, I took 6 weeks off, and going back to everyone having their advice that's just totally irrelevant because it's not you. I had multiple people that were like, oh yeah, 6 weeks. And then I went back part-time. So, I say going back, but I went back to 10 hours a week from home. And it was so difficult. It's such a consuming new identity that yeah, it's really crazy. But I love what you said about having that balance. And I think that that's such a powerful thing that there are more options now. So I feel like before it was so like you're either in your career or you're always at home as a mom. But I feel like with things like working from home, working remotely, part-time work, even like side hustling, all these things provides a whole new reality of what balance can mean for women.
It does, but so in some ways I don't know if the choices are easier.
Yeah, right? No, I think that's worse.
I think about like my, mother is 65. And so she was working in our household. She worked part-time, and she had 2 kids. My brother is 4 years older than I. And so she definitely had choices, but now we have more choices than ever in terms of how it looks, how your family looks, as well as how your working life works. But I think the expectation that we particularly put on ourselves as women, and society is, making steps towards not doing that, but is that we are still expected to be everything to everyone.
Yes.
And so managing, how do you feel like a success at home, and how do you feel like a success at work? If you don't feel like a success at work, then what's it worth? And, the reasons for why you're working sometimes, it's challenging to balance all of that. And just when you think you have it figured out, your kids get older, or you have another kid, and then everything changes again. And so it's this constantly evolving decision, I think, is what I'm trying to make is, gosh, Lou's 5, and let's say he's 8, and he's in a bunch of activities, and I'm in a different work situation, and I feel like I'm missing everything. Well, I'm only having one, as far as I can tell at this point, and I want to do it right. So I think the second, like I'm I'm really failing and I'm not doing that well, then maybe I will look at that decision. I don't think of it as a stagnant decision. I think the decision to work evolves as our family and my personal, right? Like part of why I work is just that I want to. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I should be ashamed of that because, nobody, when I was having my son, no one was like, hey, Brat, you got to stay home.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Nobody was looking at him. And granted, he does make more money than I do. And maybe everybody assumed that. And that's why that question isn't asked. But I think it's not asked for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think the moral of the story is it's not an easy decision to make.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think too, like now that there's this, you can do anything, it's like a constant FOMO of if you're working very hard, then it's like, well, should I be home? And if you're home, then it's like, well, should I be working? And it's just, yes, there are more opportunities to balance it, but that also means there's more things that we can see that we're not doing. And it's so easy to get caught up on the things we're not doing instead of celebrating the things we are doing.
I agree because we live in this Instagram world right now, and I actually choose to not be a part of social media for many reasons, but one of which is that sometimes I think social media tells us what it should look like, right? And we try to live up to what we think it should look like. And what I try to continually check in with myself and my family on is what matters to us and are we fulfilling what matters? Because like I'm never going to be the mom with the perfect cupcakes and like the cupcake carrier. I probably won't be the mom who makes like the homemade Halloween costumes, partly because it's just not necessarily out of the fact that I don't have time to, but that's just not how I'm built. Right. So some of the decisions that I make and the things that I put my energy in aren't about being spread too thin. It's just about this is what I want. I'm not a Michael's mom. Like I'm not a craft mom who's doing those things, but that's not because again, I'm working and you can do those things when you're working. It's just, there's less time, certainly. And then you just have to prioritize what makes sense for your family. So it's great. Like I love those moms who have the amazing cupcakes and the carriers. I'm just like, but yeah, there still is that little party that's like, oh, well, I barely found clean pants for Lou today. So I felt like I won just because we got out the door, 5 minutes early rather than 15 minutes late. But I think that is a challenge, right? We live in a society where we compare ourselves to each other still. And especially I think as women that we do that because we do kind of still expect everything from ourselves. And then we also live in this ratings world. Like you can't, I won't even buy anything anymore. I'm like, well, what are the ratings? And it's like, we apply that to our own life too. We grade ourselves, I think, on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's so true. And the danger with social media is I think it's so easy to look at. I mean, you can take 5 minutes and scroll through 100 different people, see all of their strengths and compare like 100 people's strengths to your own few strengths, which is normal. We all only have a few strengths, but it's just so easy to think that everyone else is doing all these incredible things when really each of us, we all have a few things we're good at. We all have a few things we're not good at. But yeah, man, the comparison on social media is really, it really is killer.
It's tough because, even when we talk about our weaknesses, it's in this like self-deprecating way. It's like we're constantly in a job interview where, someone's like, that terrible question of like, what is your weakness? And be like, I care too much. That's my weakness. And so I think that happens in social media too, where no one's like, hey, you know what? I completely forgot a meeting today. I just didn't show up for it. And then I ended up having to pick up Lou 45 minutes late. He peed his pants. He didn't have a change of clothes. And then we got home and I had no idea what to do for dinner. We spent, you're like, nobody is like, hey, this is like the mundane and the downside of my life, and I'm just going to put it out there. And that makes sense, right? Because social media should be fun, and I get that about it. And you're like, well, that day wasn't fun, right? There are some days that are just not so great, and there's some that are mediocre, and there's some that are great. And then, that's why it's like we have like throwback Thursdays, right? Or on like social media. I think that's a thing because people are like, well, if I just post what's going on every day, like most days it's like, well, I made chicken nuggets for dinner, Lou went to bed, and then I read a book and I went to bed at 9:30.
Yep. Amen.
I think there's, I don't know, I like the simplicity of having child too. I think it's caused me to slow down.
Yep.
And it forces you, necessarily without thinking about it all the time, but it forces you to prioritize and really value the things that are important and push the other things away. Whether you're working outside of the home or not, I think it constantly challenges what it is that is important to you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so going along with, and I don't know if you necessarily have, you've talked about this a little already, so I don't know if you have anything else to add, but as far as your own personal experiences, work opportunities, have you felt like you've had to reassess?
Yeah, for sure. When we moved from Portland to Los Angeles, I had to leave my job. My job, hey, while you're remote, that's a little too remote. They're based out of Seattle. And so I had to start over in a city of just millions of people where the job market is very intense. And when we moved there, my son was about 2.5, and we moved through my husband's work. And it took me almost 6 months to find a job. And I think there was a couple aspects to that. One is sometimes just finding a job is just luck, right? And I've been in that hiring stage where you get 200 resumes and you look at 30 of them, and some of them you read the cover letter and you're like, no, it's a bit arbitrary in terms of sometimes how you get, how you end up getting that opportunity. And then some of it is that I probably bombed in some interviews for sure. And then the other part of it is that for what I do for learning and development, a lot of the jobs really they want you to be a corporate trainer. That's a lot of the jobs in learning and development. And being a corporate trainer means you travel a lot.
Yeah.
Some of the jobs are 75% travel. Some of them are even 25%. And I do not want to miss a single day of Lou's life. Have I missed a few days of his life? Yes. Both because occasionally there's been a couple of times where my husband and I have actually run for the hills and gotten away. Yes. Woo. That's important because you're still a person, even though you're,
Yes.
and then a few times for work, but I was like, that can't be the norm. My husband will, for the foreseeable future, always work more hours than I do. And so that's the other thing too. It's not just about me working, it's about him working, and not necessarily because of the gender aspect of it, but, I have made career sacrifices because of his job.
Right.
And so I recognize that, gosh, maybe if we didn't have Lou, I have had jobs where I did travel quite a bit, before having him. I didn't love it then anyway, but it was doable. But certainly with him in my life, again, I didn't finally decide to have a child so that I could miss out on 25% of his childhood or 75%. And so that actually definitely brought a challenge. It's maybe there are moms out there who have made those decisions because they couldn't be as picky as able to be because of our situation, or are okay with that. And you shouldn't feel bad about that either, because again, maybe the moms who do choose to make those decisions, maybe they have a lot of family support, and so there's a community of people loving and curating their child's development. Whereas in our situation, it's Brett and I really driving that for him. So if one of us is gone, there's a pretty big hole.
Yeah.
It's also just having a female brain. There are things that we do in our households that just my husband would never think of. And that's not necessarily a good thing, right? I've helped to also curate that experience within our household. So that's a long way of saying there's certainly career decisions that I have made because while I want to work, I still has to really fit in this very neat box in order for me to be okay with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's definitely this, these ideals of how we can kind of want things to be or picture things to be. And then there's just reality. And that's whatever that is for each of us, honestly. I mean, it can be different for each of us, and reality for everyone is at some point going to mean compromise. So yeah, I'd love that you shared that because I feel just very relatable to everyone. So we talked a little bit about what factors went into making those decisions for you. Do you have anything to say about maybe how your cultural background influenced the decisions you made?
Yeah, well, I came from a city in Spokane, Washington. It's in eastern Washington. It's about 200,000 people to two parents who are somewhat college educated but did not graduate from college. My mother worked part-time for pretty much for my entire life. I don't remember a time when she didn't work. And my husband, or my, excuse me, my dad was would travel for work. He was a salesman. And my mom worked nights. And so for most of my childhood, my parents were very rarely home at the same time because he would travel for work and he'd be out of town and then she would be off on those days. And I'm not sure that my mom working consciously has had any sort of impact on my decision to be a working mom. But I think probably the financial instability that we had as kids had motivated me to get a job early on. I pretty much have always worked since I was 16 years old. And that's really been out of necessity. And then maybe when it became a point where it wasn't exactly a necessity, it was still became this like core value of who I am, of someone that wanted to work, that sought something, that got something from a work environment that I couldn't get at home. And but I think that financial piece is definitely important. I think as women, right, we talk about decisions. We have more decisions now than ever. And I always wanted to keep myself in a financial decision where I could be independent if I ever needed to. Right. I'm very fortunate that I've found my person and I'm in a great relationship. But I think that having that to fall back on if I ever needed it, knowing that I had that income and that stability, definitely, whether consciously or subconsciously, has played into. So, while I don't have this really interesting background in terms of, immigrating here or anything like that, I'm very lower middle class white America struggle. I guess is my background, but certainly that has left an impression on the decisions that I've made, both as just a person in the world as well as a mom.
I love it. Okay, so I'm going to pivot a little to talk about fulfillment. So I want to talk about first, as a mom, things that you find fulfilling and also things that you do not find fulfilling.
Interesting. Well, we're at this really fun stage of my son's development because he's 5, where he loves pop music. And now I understand why NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys because up until now I was it's garbage. And now I can go back to 1999 when their concerts used to be half soccer moms, right? Well, I'm one of those soccer moms now where I'm just this is great. Because you get older and you're a parent and life is just challenging and sometimes you just want to be silly and not every song has to be about your dog getting hit by a car. Some songs just be dumb and silly. And so I think one of the new things that I find really fulfilling is picking them up from after school program or just being in the house and singing Call Me Maybe,
I love that.
And now he's really obsessed with Ghostbusters, the Ghostbusters song and the Addams Family theme song after Halloween. So this is a lot of what's being played. And now I know his dance moves from his school thing and it's just so that's fulfilling, just being able to have fun and be silly with him in a way that we're still kind of engaging on this cognitive level now. I think it's just, I like having a 5-year-old. It's super fun. So that, there's things like that and learning with him too. When you become a parent, you also realize how little you know. So he'll ask him a lot of questions and be like, what causes an explosion? I'm well, I know the idea behind it, but let's look it up. So I like that we're learning together. That brings me fulfillment. And just anytime he does or says something, or I realize he knows something and I don't know how he knows that, I'm I don't know. When you realize that you're really steering this person through life, I think that's pretty fun.
I love that. That's so great. Is there anything are there things that as a mother you find particularly challenging or not fulfilling?
I do, yeah. I feel sometimes I'm like, it'll be 8 o'clock. Like, I just am gonna go to bed because I'm tired of the sound of my own voice. Because part of like being, I think the female in the household, being the mom and having the brains that we have as women that are just different. I've been reading this book called The Wonder of Boys, and the first part of it is just like how our brains are different. I'm like, thank you, I get it now. But there's times where I just feel like I'm a nap. I just feel like I exist just to like constantly remind Lou that it's like 2 more minutes until his shower is over, 2 more minutes until bedtime. He needs to eat 3 more bites. You're like, I'm done. So that constantly being the person who has to like remind about those things. And granted, that's a thing that I'm learning, right? About, picking and choosing your battles, but those are things that are tough to not pick because otherwise he doesn't go to bed until 9:30.
Right.
And tired. Constantly shepherding him through the routine of our life, that is just, there's nothing fun about it.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you talk to someone who questions your decisions as a mom and a worker?
Sure. That, I think I just have to go back to, I'm never going to convince someone that the decisions that I've made are right. Right? If I have to convince someone, then I've already lost them. Mm-hmm. I have to remember what's important for our family and what makes sense. Is my son thriving? Am I doing well in my job? Does my job bring me fulfillment outside of just a paycheck? The hours that I actually spend with him when he's awake are limited. So I try to make those very impactful. But when you talk to people, when I say it out loud, even how much he's at school, like I judge myself sometimes. That's hard for me to be like, oh my gosh, wait, how many hours did I actually see him today? And so whether or not some of that judgment is real or whether it's perceived, I think I just have to go back to, is he happy? Is he having a good time where he is? Is he also getting things that I can't offer him in the house? Like we can play rescue box for like 2 hours, but he's also learning social skills. He's learning to be a very adaptable child. He's becoming a child who can walk into any room and find a friend. And I think that's a really great trait. So again, I just have to check back in with myself. But, certainly I feel like, especially when you have a baby, when your kids are really young, I think you get more of that. It's like, how long are you breastfeeding for? Well, have you tried, really, you stopped breastfeeding already, or you're not breastfeeding? Like, God, breastfeeding is just like this whole topic in and of itself. It's so crazy. Or like organic baby food or regular baby food, crib or bassinet, whatnot. But probably the biggest thing that I feel judgment on is having one, right? Like, why are you just having one? Like, did you have an issue? Are you like, you can be made to feel a little bit selfish. Like, oh, but you don't have brothers and sisters. And it's like, well, I have a brother, but I feel like I spent most of my life feeling pretty detached from him. And it's only in my older life that I've really felt that connection again. So I don't think you have more kids just because like it might be kind of fun for them when they're 40. Like, you also do what makes sense for your family. And for me, kind of like deciding to continue to work outside the home, I think having another child has been a very similar experience of just like, I don't know, I'll just keep evaluating it. And every year's gone by and we've been like, yeah, pretty good where we are. And so maybe we would still have another one. It would be a big gap, but people have done it. And again, I just try to remind myself that the way that our family looks doesn't have to look like everybody else's family.
I love that. Thank you. Do you have any advice for people trying to make the decision whether to work or not?
Good question. I would say, try it. If you are struggling, if it's not a clear situation for you, then try it and see if it does work and give it some time. The first couple of weeks are going to be awful depending on when you try it, right? If you're trying to go back to work right after having babies, as I alluded to before, there are things about it that are going to be uncomfortable and challenging. But if you're in a situation where you can kind of give it some time and see, then I would say if there's that part of you that's wondering, make sure that you fulfill that part of you, because then if you leave it, you'll leave it knowing that you've tried and it just didn't work for you. It wasn't what you wanted. And then on the other side of that too is just because you decided to do that for a couple of years and work for a couple of years or not work for a couple of years doesn't mean that then that's it. If you think you might go back to work, just, keep thinking about what makes sense and how to go back and have it be fulfilling. It doesn't have to be that you're going back to work for a paycheck. It's okay to say you're going back to work or you're working because you want to.
After recording my interview with Nichole, she asked me to add a little addendum to the end, so I'm going to go ahead and read that now. I had a thought about something I said during the podcast that I don't think came out the way I wanted. I was talking about not being a Michael's craft mom. It sounded judgmental, but only because I'm judging myself. I guess what I was trying to say is in 1,000 different ways, I always feel like I'm failing Lou because I'm not exposing him to everything. Like with Michael's, every year I say, let's each make each other a Christmas gift. And then inevitably it's December 23rd and I'm frantically searching the Target craft aisle for something we can do in the 15 minutes we have slotted between everything else. This, of course, totally defeats the original intent of the idea. Every day I make choices that affect Lou's world, and one of the biggest is my decision to work. As a mom who works outside the home, I've learned that I can't be everything to everyone because I still want to be something to myself, and for me, that means making a somewhat selfish decision to work. But I hope when Lou is older, he'll feel okay about the extra hours in the after-school program because I've tried to show him that we all make sacrifices for things we're passionate about. Being a mom and having a career that I love, to name a few. As you know, I've contemplated recording because of how I felt this came across. At the end of my podcast, I believe my advice to other moms was to be kind. That's advice for myself as well. Perhaps it's because I grew up with a mom who's critical and harsh, or maybe it's just the way I'm wired, but I tend to be very self-critical. With my son, I swing in the other direction, and if it's possible, I'm overly supportive. Anyway, this is why the cliche is true. It's a journey, and this is why your podcast fills an important niche. Thank you so much, Nichole, for sharing your experiences, finding fulfillment as a mother and in your career. And thank you, audience, for listening. You can connect with me and find show notes at themomspectrum.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. Next week, join us to hear from Megan Dicklin, founder of Nesting Your Business and consultant to new parent business owners.